Nobody really cared about peptides because it was kind of just bro science at gym.
I put my parents on peptide. The reason why I blew up on social media. I know you mentioned the MASALA study.
And it was one of the first studies done specifically for the South Asian.
What are your favorite peptides and why are they your favorite peptides? All right, guys, so I'm here with Dr. Chaudhury from Premier Biolabs. We did a Q&A on my Instagram and it got a lot of hits. So I wanted to ask him a more, unfiltered version because, of course, IG and TikTok are very restricting on how we can say things. So I'm going to interview him about peptides. We're going to talk about guidelines, stuff in the industry that maybe we might not be able to talk about on Instagram. So here's Dr. Chaudhury.
Nice. Thanks for having me. This is really great. A lot of the social media platforms seem to be so limiting in what we can say. And I think YouTube is a great platform for this.
Yeah, let's crank it out. So tell us who you are and how you got involved in the peptide space, and also you could touch on how we met as well.
Absolutely. So I've been a physician since 2009, and the peptide industry has changed a lot, as we know, in the last couple of years and definitely in the last 5 years. I've been a hospitalist physician, which is someone who takes care of people in the acute setting, oftentimes due to chronic illnesses. I think peptides in the last couple of years has really changed and evolved for a lot of people to understand the benefits of them. And I was very lucky to be able to meet you and connect with you and focus in on the South Asian population specifically. And we talked about the UCSF MASALA Study as being one of the studies that really propelled that to the next level. And when I added that combined with peptides, I realized that the impact, not only for South Asians, could be very impactful for certain demographics that carry a lot of visceral fat. And there are very few alternatives, outside of peptides that can really help visceral fat and a lot of these things. So I think that peptides are unique in that way. And I think that both of us combining and getting in touch with each other and working with each other has been like one of the greatest things that have happened for at least me in the peptide space.
Yeah, I completely agree. So as you guys know, I put my parents on peptides, right? That's part of the reason why I blew up on social media. And Dr. Chaudhury reached out to me, and at first, I didn't know who he was. There was a lot of different peptide companies reaching out to me. And my goal with the, peptide space, especially putting my parents on peptides, was to show that peptides are longevity and, a health benefit to people of all ages, not just the athlete. And so Dr. Chaudhury recognized that, and that's how we got into touch. And I know you mentioned the MASALA study, and you mentioned that a lot when we first started talking. Could you kind of tell them a little bit more about the MASALA study and why it's relevant?
Yeah, definitely. And we probably would have to save it to like a separate thing to really go into it, but all these research studies have these long acronyms, and this one, MASALA, actually stands for Mediators of Atherosclerosis in South Asians Living in America, and it was one of the first studies done specifically for the South Asian demographic and reviewing cardiovascular risk factors for heart disease, including diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia. But we probably would have to save on that for next discussion to deep dive that one. But speaking about parents, and not just South Asian parents, but what we're seeing in this whole peptide evolution is that usually there's one guinea pig family member, and then they have some type of results that make them really enjoy it, right? 100%, right? And then we introduce it to our loved ones because we love what it did for us and we want to share that with our loved one, right?
100%.
And doing that for our parents, it's one of the greatest gifts of having the ability to not necessarily reverse a lot of chronological disease, but give them the chance to have a better quality of life. And that's what I see happening at family gatherings, that they're like, oh, what have you done? You look amazing. What's happening? And it goes so forth. So you sharing that with your parents is one of the best things that somebody can do for their parents to give them a better quality of life.
Yeah, and so when we talk about, South Asians, obviously my parents are Gujarati, they're from India, and I've touched about this, but, two peptides that come into mind are Reta and Tesa, right? So retatrutide, Tesamorelin, because of what they can do for, your blood sugar levels, your cholesterol, your lipids. Tesamorelin targets visceral fat, which is an area of high concern, especially in the South Asian population. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So taking it back, there are definitely different, even within India, a lot of people don't realize that there's like South India, North India, and all these different states. And it's very interesting to find when you have like a lot of Gujarat being just a vegetarian-based diet and still having these, elevated data for high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high risk of diabetes, despite being on a vegetarian diet. So maybe that's not exactly it, right? So we have to think about, is it the way we process food? Is there genetic factors in there? like what's actually going on. So, but
Yeah, we always
yeah.
talk about like the skinny fat phenotype, right? And so it's like this very high cortisol, high stress body type of being kind of skinny, but you store a lot of belly fat. And it's from this sedentary lifestyle. And a lot of Indian, South Asian food is very high in fats, very high in carbs, very low in protein. On top of that, these people aren't moving, correct? And so that's kind of what we're trying to do with these peptides. Obviously, it's not just about the peptides, right? We try to get people more active, eating healthier, eating protein, whether, you know, if you're vegetarian, you can't eat meat, at least getting your sources from Greek yogurt, right? Like a big problem in the new peptide kind of wave is people are just trying to go off of the peptides, but we also talk about the lifestyle that needs to come with the peptides. And so what do you feel like is the necessary steps when you're taking peptides, you know, if we're talking about diet, nutrition for people to be doing regardless of their age?
Yeah, so like to maybe go on a different pathway, like not just South Asians, you know, but the diet is a big thing for sure. Like just interpreting your diet, right? Because if you grow up in a way where lentils and rice, you know, is like a main component, 75% of your diet, you know, on average, it changes everything, that from a high carb to switch to a high protein. And sometimes certain sources, especially for vegetarians, it's hard to get that if your main components are even vegetables, dal, and rice. You have like carb on carb and maybe more carbs. So remind me again what we were saying.
So yeah, how do you implement some of those other lifestyle factors on top of peptides?
Okay. I think peptides, like, it's just like a supplement, like a boost, like kind of like the way
Correct.
ChatGPT should be used, right? People want to just flow everything into one source and hope that something happens, but actually having the understanding of what you're doing before you start and getting the research behind it yourself before starting any peptide program. It's just like, you know, spitting something into ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Do you understand what you're telling it? Do you understand what you're going to do with that data?
Yeah.
It's just like a resource.
Yeah, and ChatGPT, the fact that we're talking about it, right? People go to ChatGPT for a lot of peptide advice, and obviously it doesn't have all the details. It doesn't have the experience. A lot of the clinical data hasn't been published yet. So what would you tell someone that tries to get their peptide knowledge from ChatGPT?
I think ChatGPT is like actually a really good source, especially if you want to kind of do it on the fly. But I think there's definitely, especially when it comes to dosing, it's just very specific for each individual. And I think maybe a year or two ago, you might have had a little bit more, but actually ChatGPT, from my knowledge, is more restricted in this space. And it's severely limiting, because if you are pumping in a whole bunch of information into ChatGPT and you get the wrong dose, it could be, you know, detrimental to your, you know, results.
And I'm happy you brought that up, because I agree there is a lot of accurate information on ChatGPT about peptides, but the one problem is the dosing, right? And that's a very big problem, is it gives you inaccurate dosing. And what happens when you take too much Reta, too much Tesa? Like, we've seen people have crazy histamine reactions on Tesamorelin, right? And that's not a fun thing to do. So, you know, when you're taking these peptides, you want to make sure you're going through a trusted source, whether that's, you know, me as your coach, because I coach people on peptides, or the doc, you know, and his clinical experience, because he also has a concierge service where he helps people on peptides.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, if one can like really learn as much as possible before starting something, rather than just making a quick decision, that is usually best. And rather than trying to stack a whole bunch of peptides, the dosing actually is pretty much incomplete on ChatGPT from what I can tell. I think reconstitution, maybe they might accurately do it if you feed it the right information, but there's also good peptide calculators out there as well.
Sure. What are your favorite peptides, and why are they your favorite peptides?
This is like such a good question. You know, I can't help but just start off with, you know, our ultimate GLP-3, hitting all those receptors.
Reta, right?
You know, I still, when you even tell me the most understated, you know, underrated one,
yeah.
Somebody asked that yesterday, I still think it's underrated, as crazy as that sounds, you know?
There's so many benefits to Reta, and they're finding more and more use case scenarios outside of weight loss, right? Like, obviously you have all the addiction stuff, and these GLP-1 companies are funding more research for just the like the brain benefits of Reta, the GLP-1, the dopamine receptors. And so, you know, you can talk a lot about Reta for days, right? It's still underrated because people are still using it for a very limited use case of weight loss.
You know, I think with the introduction of Reta, we really saw things going past weight loss. We saw that the interpretation for the highest level individuals in the fitness and health and medical industry, for people who really understand it, retatrutide is a true metabolic reset, and it's not just about weight loss. If you want to do just weight loss and lose muscle and not optimize your metabolic health, go think about semaglutide and tirzepatide. I think anybody who is actually knowledgeable will consider retatrutide at least at some point.
Yeah, I think semaglutide is the worst. I know there's a big market for it still out there. I just think it does too much damage. We see a lot of side effects, and it's so harsh on your GLP-1 receptor, and that's how people lose so much muscle, because it just nukes your hunger and you can't do anything on top of that. I do like tirzepatide a little bit better. I think there is a use case for tirzepatide, and of course my bias, Reta is the best, right? And I know we talked about these different use cases for Reta, and people get mind blown when I use Reta for bulking, right? It's like we talk about the insulin sensitivity benefits of Reta, and when you take Reta in low doses on a bulk, you can actually lean bulk better because of how your body utilizes carbs, fats, protein, more so than, not being on a GLP-1 that benefits your insulin sensitivity.
Absolutely. I think that the broad spectrum use of Reta is being more and more accepted, and you will find a lot of the top bodybuilding and fitness enthusiasts be utilizing retatrutide at a low dose for what they call lean bulk, and that allows you the capacity to ingest enough protein to bulk at the same time while staying really lean and being aware of what you are eating. That's what I would say is one of the best things about being on a lean bulk while on Reta.
100%. How do you feel about where the regulations are heading with GLP-1s, with the Eli Lilly cracking down some of these new FDA regulations, and they're coming after some RUO companies? What are your thoughts on that? Where do you see the industry with 503A facilities and obviously the future of peptides?
I mean, so that's a lot of questions in one, but specifically with the GLPs, we can start with that and then kind of go forward. We saw semaglutide during Ozempic, whatever, during the COVID time, it really put peptides like on the map for a lot of people, because at that point, people never really have heard of peptides. And then the next generation being tirzepatide, and then obviously retatrutide. I think that we are looking at probably a fast track approval of retatrutide, into late 2026, 2027. I don't know when that will happen, but the phase 3 data, clinical data is astounding.
It's strong,
really
strong.
Great results. Obviously, they went at a lot higher dose, and it was 48-week study. So, but I think that there will be a lot more things that come up. We saw 14 compounds, go into kind of a less regulated state that were, RFK. A lot of this stuff is, you can follow it on social media, as you know. But there's going to be a lot more changes. That's all I can say, because I don't. There's no way.
We don't really know
where it's going, and I think that's super exciting. One thing that's evident in the last year or so, maybe 2 years. Millions and millions of Americans that are, supposedly, utilizing this as a resource. People have had really good results, and it's just evident in people's anecdotal data. If they were to, like the research, you can't even get that type of population data. So it's really cool to see that. It used to just be like, if you would go 5, 10, 15, 20 years back even, like a lot of these peptides were already being utilized in the bodybuilding and fitness world. And they truly were the baseline first level of data that started everything.
100%.
And their dosing may not be completely adequate, but it provided the baseline for all of us to enjoy things now. And that's why I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who dedicate their lives in the physical fitness and aesthetic world, because it takes a lot to reach a 10% body fat, or to utilize nutrition and fitness and stay disciplined. And I think that peptides supplement that. And we owe a lot of the initial data to the people who really put their bodies at risk by doing crazy doses of everything from growth hormones, secretagogues, AGH, all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned, the phase 3 data. We see a lot of phase 3 data for Reta, and typically people are running Reta in these kind of bodybuilder cycles of 3 to 4 months, yet in the clinical data, they're running Reta in, of course, larger doses, but also for longer periods. What do you think is, appropriate for a Reta dose, right? You see people running Sema, you see people running TERS, and now Reta, like, what do you think is appropriate for people in terms of how long they can run a GLP-1?
We talk about like GLP-1, we kind of talk about the family, but I'd like to probably focus in on Reta, because it's what we don't know, and I think it'll be the most beneficial to talk about. So we saw 48 weeks, right? And then we saw, escalations. They started at 2 milligrams, which is higher, go up to, 8, 12 milligrams.
2 is my comfort dose, by the way, right?
That's why it's so individual, right? Yeah. Like we see people like, my wife, Amanda, right? She's chilling on 1 milligram and it's like, like not eating, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's different. Like I'm
Yeah.
at 2 milligrams and I feel spectacular, right?
Right,
But
right.
I also, it's all individual, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting
Yeah.
to kind of discuss
Yeah.
that. But I think like everybody has a different landing dose. I
Right.
think people who have just weight loss as their outcome in this are going to have different results and different dosing patterns. I would say that people can probably be on Reta, from what I can tell, without having any of the like full clinical data for multiple years if done at a low maintenance level and have their labs checked on a frequent basis and also be under clinical supervision. Otherwise, running Reta for short-term periods is probably not going to be advantageous to their overall health.
Yeah, and you mentioned lab work, right? And that's huge because people underestimate the power of lab work, right? In my coaching, we always talk about trying to see where your levels are at, before you get started, to see how some of these peptides affect your IGF-1 levels, affect your blood sugar, your cholesterol, maybe some of your liver enzymes. Could you talk a little bit about, the importance of blood work and what that means for peptides?
Yeah, absolutely. Like once again, I'll just keep going back to Reta since that's
Yeah.
what we're kind of talking about. The clinical parameters that are actually very interesting in this area for Reta is you can see about 12 to 14 millimeters per mercury drop in blood pressure, which is pretty cool. Some of these happen with weight loss as well, less cardiovascular strain. You can see a drop in hemoglobin A1C, which is the glycosylation of hemoglobin over 3 months, which is a much better average of knowing what
Metric for
someone's
blood
blood. It's a
sugar.
better
Right, yeah,
for
100%.
diabetes. That's what we
Yeah,
use.
yeah.
It used to be just blood sugar
yeah.
levels, but there's a high fluctuation, right? So you can see about a 1.2 drop approximately in hemoglobin A1C. So not saying you can say that retatrutide reverses diabetes or eliminates diabetes, but it definitely improves.
And manages, right?
Absolutely.
100%.
I think that we will probably see some stuff where people are able to come off low doses of long-acting insulin, which is, we call it like glargine or Lantus. And I think if people appropriately utilize retatrutide and get a nice maintenance dose, they'll find themselves coming off of daily injectable Lantus
Right.
and checking your blood sugar 3 times a day and be able to be on once weekly dosing, which is much more, has a higher compliance level and has much more metabolic benefits. So this is really interesting. So we also see a drop in cholesterol, LDL. These are all really good clinical parameters that tell me that this will be used initially in a very specific population, but then be used in a regulated way across the board for a lot more patients.
Definitely. And so let's pivot a little bit. Obviously, we've been talking about Reta. Everyone knows Reta's the best. We love Reta. But if you were to say your top 2 peptides outside of
going back
Reta,
to that, geez.
yeah, 100%. What would you say those are and why, and how can people utilize those best?
Gosh, for me, like personally, I always think like what was amazing for me. It's
Right.
hard to like really.
Yeah,
you
and I mean
know-
that's what I want you to do. What works for you? What do you see with some of your clinical people like?
Yeah, so I obviously loved Tesamorelin. We've kind of talked about it. I don't want to spend too much time talking about that one specifically, but what I can say is that, some of the silent killers are things that we don't always see, right? And I always kind of, even though I'm not an oncologist by
Yeah,
training,
yeah,
I
yeah.
do think about like, okay, the obesity-related cancers span across at least 13 different cancers, right?
Yeah.
And when we decrease visceral fat, especially in high-risk populations like South Asians, we can't help but to think that can we have a decreased mortality
Right.
risk if we decrease visceral fat?
And visceral fat is the fat around your
Oh,
organs.
thank you for
right, and that's the
clarifying, yeah.
stuff that kills you over because you have different fat, right? You have visceral fat, and then you have the more
Subcutaneous fat,
subcutaneous
yeah,
fat,
correct.
right? And so subcutaneous fat isn't as deadly as visceral fat because visceral
Absolutely.
fat over time can lead to other, like heart disease, obesity-related diseases. So I mean that's an important right clarification to make.
Yeah, they've changed around the acronym. Like a lot of medicine is all these crazy acronyms that make it hard for people to really understand. And I really like to break it down. Like if I can't understand like what someone's job is within
Right.
like a couple minutes, I'm like, dude, stop it,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
So like, they've changed this term, but non-alcoholic fatty liver disease,
Yep.
the fat around the liver is something that I think people need to be more aware of, right? So you don't need to drink a whole lot of alcohol to develop fat around our liver, but you also can't see it, right? So how do you even know that it's an issue until you get your liver function test done, right?
Right.
But I think that Tesamorelin, to go back to like kind of favorite peptides, I know it's right now just FDA approved for a very specific subset of population with, HIV patients. But I think that one is my favorite. It requires the highest compliance level. We talked about it being dosed for the optimal level at night for the pulsatile growth hormone release, whatever it is. I think that one is just amazing. It also has a lot of issues with the administration and compliance and like potential reactions that, you know, we've had in a very few amount of people, but it's, you know, people do have some reactions to
So
it.
that being said, could you talk about the importance of titrating your dose, and not just with Tesamorelin, but with every peptide? But you can talk about, you know, Tesamorelin in that aspect as well.
Yeah, Tesamorelin's kind of an easy one to talk about because, you know, typically it's only available in a 10 milligram vial,
Right.
and it's an easy reconstitution, you know, and I think that, you know, the data is very specific in optimal dosing being at 2 milligrams, right? We know that you can do it Monday through Friday. It's not always necessary to do that with a 2-day break, so you can have a longer cycle length
Sure.
potentially.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, women are usually at 1 milligram, men. It's very specific to the
Right,
individual.
right.
I like to do it at everything at a lower dose, right?
We're at
It's
least
like,
starting at a lower dose,
let's
right?
start at a
Because
lower dose and then go up, low and slow.
yeah.
And then you figure out what's working for you. What you would rather have a side effect at a really low dose than go at a high dose and have side effects.
Because the mistake a lot of people make with peptides is, you know, with, for example, Reta, you take 2 milligrams, but you don't start at 2 milligrams, right? Like a lot of people start at 2 milligrams and they get dysesthesia or the nausea, right? When you go up too fast in the GLP-1, that's where the side effects come from. With Tesamorelin, right? Like a lot of people's maintenance dose or working dose is 2 milligrams, but you don't want to start at 2 milligrams, especially if you've never taken this compound before. Start at 0.5, work up to 1, and see how your body reacts, because everyone has a different reaction. Some people might get a histamine response, other people might not, right?
Absolutely. I mean, going back to the GLP, you know, GLP family or retatrutide, you know, the dosing on that is tricky. People, you know,
It's all over the place, right?
Like we have friends on, you know, double-digit milligrams,
yeah.
and they're lean, and that's just what they require. Some people need that, and I think they need it a lot more for, you know, certain impulse control, right? So we were talking about mental health just yesterday, right? Like a lot of appetite control is based in the brain. That's what we've talked about, right? And if people have improvements in their mental health and they require a higher dose of retatrutide, it's all good. I would rather patients be on that than antidepressants and anxiolytics or, you know, anxiety medication.
100%.
And I think that that's why it's a beautiful, you know, therapeutic. Once weekly or maybe twice weekly if you're kind of maintaining a maintenance dose. But I think that's much better to utilize than a daily dose that people aren't compliant with and can affect their neurotransmitters.
I agree. So a big question that comes up with some of these peptides, especially Reta, since we love talking about Reta, is can you take Reta when you're sick? What are the important things to do if you're gonna, you know, continue taking some of these GLP-1s, including Reta, if you have something like a viral infection like the flu?
No, it's good that you bring this up. So, you know, in the beginning, it's the most important because Reta has a half-life about 6.5 days. That's why you have a once weekly dosing pattern. I think that just things come up in people's life, right? They, I don't know, go on vacation, they're traveling, you know, they don't know how to bring their peptides with them, get sick or whatever it is, right? It's even hard for people to be compliant on once weekly.
Right.
Getting sick is one of those things where it's like, okay, what do I do now? Do I stop my peptides? You definitely don't feel like going through, you know, a lot of different things, like people's exercise goes down. Oftentimes, you know, if you're really sick and you kind of just like lay, like I think movement is medicine, right?
Yeah.
And so I like Reta because I don't feel like, you know, you necessarily have to like stop everything you're doing. But anyway, to go back and answer your question, retatrutide has not been shown to suppress the immune system at all. So I think that you could potentially consider continuing on you don't need to stop your GLP. The main thing that you would want to hold a dose for is if you notice that you have inadequate hydration or inadequate dietary intake where you need micronutrients. At the baseline level, you need these things at the cellular level. Like people can do whatever peptides want. If you don't eat and drink and hydrate and have good protein intake and your baseline foundation is not solidified, you're going to get sick.
Right.
You're not going to improve. You're going to take 3 weeks to bounce back from that immune response. And we could talk about thymosin and all those other fun ones, you know?
Yeah.
But really, if you don't have those baseline things done, you don't have hydration and all of those type of things, you know, it's hard to bounce back from getting a viral illness.
So on top of that, like you just mentioned thymosin alpha 1, what would be your go-to immunity stack if you were to get sick?
When I get sick, you know, I'm pretty quick to, you know, I have little kids, so it's so hard to not get sick because what they get at school around their 15, 20 friends, you know, I'm like optimized for an immune response because I've gotten sick before. and I'm not able to, I want to be able to do everything that I do, even if I get sick. I do, like, I get, taken down every once in a while for a couple days, right? The last 5 years has changed the way people have, or 6 years actually, how medicine is seen, because viral illnesses during COVID time with long COVID, whatever, right? It's taken people down, right? And, when we saw it spread through schools and all this kind of stuff, it's been crazy to see this. So my stack, I maintain hydration. Come here. My stack, we could have him in the video. Come here, stay with daddy for a little bit. So when this guy brings the boogers out from his preschool, first thing I do is I maintain adequate hydration.
Speaking of the devil, right?
Yeah, let's see what sicknesses this guy brings in his snotty noses. Here. You want this or not? Am I going to eat it and it's it? All right. So where were we at? Okay, so thymosin alpha 1, the thymus gland right here in the neck. Everybody ignores that stuff. That's where we get the production of our T cells. Starts dropping in our 20 to 30s, age group, and everybody ignores it. Really drops in our 40s. So just having T cells are the inflammatory response that we need to fight off a lot of these infections. Viral illnesses are the most common, 80-90% when people are sick. It's usually viral. No need to take antibiotics. It's the hardest thing to discuss with thousands of patients and moms, they want their kids to be on antibiotics right away. Guess what? Otitis media, right? Ear infection, right? 80-90% or greater probably are actually just a viral illness, and they just need time to heal, right? So anyway, back to the peptide stack. I would say the number one thing is to really just do the normal things that you do in your daily life. Don't just stop doing everything. But for me personally, gosh, I know I was hopping around it. I still do glutathione,
That's a good one.
I kind of pump that up a little bit. Yeah. It's the strongest antioxidant. It's one of the, I think it's still underrated a little bit. Just a few times a week. You don't have to do it every day.
And it's good for your skin, right?
Oh, I mean, one of the big utilizations internationally, Rahul, especially in the kind of Asian population, has been glutathione for its skin brightening thing. It has to be done over a longer term. But hey, you get the skin rejuvenation, you get the antioxidants, you feel better. But yeah, I mean, there's probably some that I'm not
we also talked about glutathione reversing some of the negative side effects of melanotan too,
that's
right?
Hilarious,
so
right?
Obviously, if you take MT2 and you overdo it, you're going to get kind of dark and darker than you should. And people have used glutathione to actually reverse some of those side effects of MT2.
That's that's a fun one. MT1, MT2, they're both used in the skin tanning thing, and we can talk about that maybe at a later date. But
for sure.
I would say, would you, in the absence of melanoma and all these all of this I'm saying in the absence of having a full screening for, cancer and having your primary care physician review everything with you. This is all with those things cleared, but MT1, MT2 can potentially be an option that's better than going to a skin tanning salon, or whatever those things. I think why would you do that when you can do 3 doses of MT1 or MT2 and achieve those results and or optimize them in natural sun, right?
Yeah. And those aren't peptides you or me need to take because we're kind of already there.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, I try 90-something% of the peptides before I introduce it to the market, right?
100%.
So I even I'm already brown and I still tried MT2 and I was like, let me just see what happens. And once again, I go low, I go slow, and I just try to see what's going to happen. And I check to make sure everything's all good. And guess what? I found out that areas of previous hyperpigmentation can be accelerated hyperpigmented. And, would I do it again? Probably not. But I was like, let me see if I turn golden brown. You know what I mean?
I get a lot of people ask me all the time about MT1, MT2 dosage. And obviously I speak from the data and what we've talked about, but it's one that I've never tried and I don't plan on trying it. If I end up trying it, it'll be strictly for experimental purposes, but I don't think I need MT1 or MT2, right? It's for a different population, and it's also blown up pretty heavily amongst the Looksmaxxing community on social media, right? It's like MT1, MT2, and then taking GHKCU along with Reta has been like the glow up stack. And so how have you seen social media kind of influence peptides over the past couple of years?
No, that's really interesting. So I'd like to start it by saying I have not been heavily involved with social media.
I'm kind of helping you.
You're helping me because I don't even know how to look up these reels and stories and all this kind of stuff. But I'm learning about it and it's really interesting. And I would think that, sometimes we need certain dopamine releases when people scroll and they get dopamine, right? And if you can integrate it with good content and news, and there's very few people that are actually able to deliver it, I think you do that in a very sophisticated way, which
Appreciate
is why,
you. Yeah, 100%.
which is why I'm happy
Yeah.
that we're working together.
Yeah.
Your deliverables on the social media give good, adequate content in a very good academic way, you know?
Yeah.
And it's concise and it's you can absorb it. So I like that. But social media is completely evolved. Nobody really cared about peptides because it was kind of just bro science at gyms.
Right, yeah.
But now it's like, hey, you can get really good information. You can also get really bad misinformation
right.
stuff on there
Yeah.
too. You know, so I don't think that anybody should just utilize one resource. For
And that's why I'm always looping in the clinical data, right? I try to bring in you, obviously, and also all the studies that have either been published, whether they're, you know, studies on mice or clinical data, phase 2 stuff. Like, people need to see the actual research and not just the bro science, like you mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have to separate, like, what works on a mouse doesn't necessarily mean
Not
it's going
always,
to work
right? Yeah.
on a human, you
That's
know?
why a lot of stuff doesn't go to clinical, right?
Exactly, right? So but social media has like completely changed the landscape of peptides. I think medicine in general. You can
Right.
get so much good. I mean, I found out about the whole RFK thing through a Joe Rogan podcast, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, if I'm getting the news, like I don't watch the news really. Like I don't watch TV in general. That's just me personally. But
Yeah.
if I'm getting like big information on the complete change of how peptides are going to be introduced into our country through social media, I would say we should expect that.
Yeah.
And I think I think it's not changing.
Yeah,
It's only
I
going to
agree with
become a bigger framework for knowledge.
Let's talk about Mots C, right? How has it gained in popularity and why, you know, a lot of companies, it's always out of stock, right? And so can you talk about that versus, you know, obviously every company always has Reta, but why is Mots C kind of lower in inventory amongst all these peptide companies?
Yeah, I think like peptides are gaining popularity to the point that it's almost seasonal. So like as things become popular on social media or there's a big educational boom, I don't want to say Reta became like less popular, but we see that like there's a huge like social media boom with Reta, and then now people are like, what next, right?
Yeah.
And like it's easy, like when you see Glow and Clo in the marketing, I mean it's called Glow, right? It's like there's a big marketing just behind the acronym of Glow and the blends, the peptide blends, right? So with Mots C, you know, and the other mitochondrial optimizing peptides, I mean it's been around for a longer time, but it became more popular recently. And then I think we saw flux with SS-31 when that got FDA approved for Barth syndrome, right?
Yeah.
And then people were like, well, what else? You know, how do I like schedule SS-31 and Mots C? Should I do them together? Do I do them 2 weeks before? Do I do them 4 weeks before? What about the cardiolipin membrane?
SS-31 doesn't work for a lot of people. Can you explain why that is?
No, that's interesting. I wouldn't say like people are like under responders or, you know, there's like hyper responders. I just think that, I don't know. I just don't know, like some people, like everybody's different.
Well, not everybody has damaged mitochondria.
Yeah, I think like sometimes like it's like, okay, we know that it works to improve mitochondrial function, but let's say your mitochondria are doing well and you're already optimized, like what are realistic expectations for certain peptides and what are you going to achieve with them? And I think like people think that, oh my gosh, I'm going to fix like all this fatigue that I've been having, right? And where maybe your mitochondrial health are okay and there's other underlying issues that are related to your chronic fatigue. So that's why it is important to kind of review those things and do the research first before it's like a big fad, like, yo, I want to get SS-31 or whatever it is, like it goes through these things. So that's why I think like for Mots C, I think like it went kind of with the SS-31 craze.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably end up seeing blends of both of those,
Right.
but I don't think it's always necessary
Right.
with these blends. But that's just, I have a personal bias with that. You know?
100%. Well, I think that about wraps it up. I appreciate Dr. Chaudhury for being here. My battery died on that last clip, but obviously we want to say bye, and you guys got to subscribe to my channel because I'll be doing more content with Dr. Chaudhury and more educational content in general. So appreciate you for being here, and of course subscribe, and we'll see you guys soon.
All right, thanks for having us.